The celebration aboard the Aurora's grace shimmered with light and laughter, a rare release after months of tight negotiations. For Kale Duran, an Earth diplomat accustomed to cautious words and stiff postures, the evening felt strangely intoxicating. Music floated through the air, unlike any human melody, notes bending and resonating as though the ship itself were part of the orchestra. Guests mingled under crystalline arches that glowed faintly with shifting colors, like starlight refracted through living glass. At the heart of it all sat Empress Selene Vera, ruler of the Veran Dominion. She was striking even among her own kind, tall and regal, her skin a soft lilac hue that caught the light with subtle radiance. Cascading down her back was a mane of platinum white hair that gleamed like threads of ice. Her eyes, vast and luminous, shifted color with emotion, now a warm amber that reflected both curiosity and amusement. Kale had expected her to be intimidating, as his briefings insisted, but in this setting she seemed almost approachable. The ceremonial armor and regalia were absent tonight. Instead, she wore a flowing garment of pale silver that highlighted the graceful lines of her frame. Despite her stature and aura of command, there was something in the way she leaned forward during conversation, in the way she listened, that felt disarmingly human. She handed him a glass of violet liquid, the Dominion ceremonial drink, said to taste of starlight itself. Kale accepted politely, though after the first sip he found himself smiling. It carried a warmth and subtle intoxication remarkably similar to earth wine. The Empress studied his reaction, her lips curving in amusement. "I had expected your people to resist far more fiercely," she admitted, her voice like wind chimes struck softly in a breeze. "So had I," Kale replied, raising his glass. "The reports painted your empire as daunting. Yet I've found our talks unexpectedly reasonable." Selene's laughter rang like glass bells, light and musical. "We cultivate such impressions. Fear is an efficient tool in diplomacy." She tilted her head, platinum hair spilling over her shoulder as she examined him. "And yet, here you are, unshaken. Refreshing." The more they spoke, the less Kale felt the weight of his role. They drifted from trade routes to philosophy, from matters of empire to small glimpses of personal life. And beneath her poised responses, Kale caught flashes of something else, loneliness. The kind that came from power so absolute it isolated. "Tell me," he asked carefully, "why were your concessions so generous in the final draft? Even your advisors seemed surprised." Her eyes shifted toward a contemplative blue. "Because dominance is not always the most sustainable path. Sometimes genuine cooperation secures more lasting prosperity. Few rulers understand that." Kale studied her profile against the expanse of stars beyond the viewport. It was easy to imagine her surrounded always by court intrigue, pursued by opportunists, never simply herself. Perhaps it was the wine, perhaps the gentle pulse of music, but he spoke more freely than protocol would ever permit. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "I've enjoyed this conversation because you've been yourself, not just the Empress. You're intelligent, sharp, and surprisingly down-to-earth." Selene's amber eyes softened, her smile touched with genuine warmth. "Thank you, Kale. That means more than you realize." The silence stretched, comfortable but charged. And then, carried on a surge of boldness he didn't quite recognize as his own, Kale blurted, "Honestly, you'd make a cute wife." The words fell like a comet into still waters, sending ripples that would never fade. Selene froze, glass halfway to her lips. Her gaze shifted, amber bleeding into a calculating silver Kale had seen only in the throne room. Around them, the celebration continued undisturbed, oblivious to the gravity of what had just been spoken. Kale's heart thudded. "Your Majesty, I didn't mean, I was just." She raised one elegant hand, silencing him instantly. Her eyes flared violet, a color he hadn't seen before, sharp with intensity. When she spoke, Her voice carried not as casual conversation but as formal decree. I accept. Kale blinked. Accept, what, exactly? Your proposal, Kale Duran. I accept your offer of marriage. The universe tilted sideways. My what? I wasn't. But she had already risen, tall and radiant, platinum hair catching the starlight as she lifted her hand in a ceremonial gesture. The room hushed. Every Varen turned, their humming voices blending into a harmonic chorus of celebration as her proclamation rang clear. Citizens of the Dominion, I am pleased to announce my engagement to Envoy Kale Duran of Earth. The formal rituals shall commence according to tradition. The humans in attendance erupted in confused whispers, while the Varens resonated with tones of jubilation. Kale, stunned, felt hands clasping his shoulders, bows offered in congratulations, and the wide-eyed horror of his own colleagues closing in. Dr. Alara Miles, the mission's cultural advisor, appeared at his side with the expression of someone staring at a diplomatic cataclysm. Kale, what exactly just happened? I think I just accidentally proposed to the Empress, Kale stammered, and she said yes. Alara closed her eyes, inhaled deeply. Kale, Varen law is based on verbal contracts. Witnessed words are binding. Especially with royalty. The room spun. Are you telling me I'm engaged? To her? Because of a joke. Not a joke, Alara corrected grimly. A legally binding proposal. Congratulations. You may have just become the future co-ruler of the Dominion.
Across the hall, Celine met his gaze. She wasn't calculating, not scheming. She looked pleased. Almost delighted. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles as she called to him above the hum of celebration. Kale Duran, perhaps we should discuss the arrangements for our compatibility verification period. Compatibility, what? Kale croaked, dizzy. 30 days, she said smoothly. We have 30 days to determine whether this union should be sealed or respectfully dissolved. I look forward to the discovery. And as the cheers rose around them, Kale realized the impossible truth: his life had just changed with a single careless sentence. He hadn't only sparked an interstellar incident, he might have just rewritten the fate of 2 civilizations. The emergency meeting the next morning felt less like a diplomatic debrief and more like the opening stages of a war council. Kale sat stiffly at the table, a steaming mug of bitter stim coffee in front of him, though he hadn't managed more than a single sip. Around him, the human delegation wore matching expressions of exhaustion and disbelief. Director Anton Reyes, head of Earth's mission, pressed his fingers to his temples as though sheer pressure might undo the disaster. Let me be absolutely clear, Kale. During a casual conversation with Empress Celine Vera, you told her she'd make a cute wife. She accepted immediately, publicly, and now, according to Varen custom, you are engaged. Is that correct? Kale exhaled slowly. Unfortunately, yes. And Varen law considers verbal commitments binding, Dr. Alara Miles added, her voice dry from an entire night of research. Especially when accepted in front of witnesses. Especially when it involves the throne. Reyes groaned. Do you have any idea what this means? Honestly? Kale muttered. That my career is probably over, and possibly humanity's best chance at a stable alliance too. Closer than you think. Alara's eyes were red-rimmed, but her tone stayed sharp. Kale, royal marriage contracts in the Dominion aren't just personal. They function as political treaties. If this engagement stands, you're not only marrying the Empress, you're stepping into co-sovereignty. Authority over policy. Military. Trade. Everything. Kale's stomach dropped. The thought hadn't truly crystallized until now. A casual, drunken-sounding flirtation had catapulted him into the orbit of unimaginable responsibility. And if I don't? He asked weakly. That depends on how the dissolution is handled, Elara replied. There's a 30-day verification period. If both parties agree to cancel, the contract ends honorably. But if Selene interprets your words as frivolous, insulting, or deceitful, well, the consequences could be catastrophic. Director Reyes leaned forward, his gaze sharp. What's your impression of her reaction? Kale hesitated, recalling the look Selene had given him across the hall, the warmth in her amber eyes, the faint curve of genuine amusement. She didn't look trapped. She looked satisfied. Like she'd just gotten exactly what she wanted. The room went quiet. You think she orchestrated this, Reyes said flatly. I don't know. Kale rubbed his forehead. But she didn't seem surprised. And Elara mentioned that drink, the violet wine. What was it called? Varen Solis, Elara supplied. Traditionally used in courtship rituals. It lowers inhibitions, encourages honesty. In other words, you weren't just having a pleasant drink. You were participating in a recognized setting for proposals. Kale stared at her. So you're saying I was tricked? I'm saying, she corrected, that whether or not Selene planned it, you were caught in a cultural net where proposals are expected, binding, and celebrated. A soft chime broke the tense silence. The door slid open, revealing a tall figure in flowing robes that shimmered with shifting light. His features were angular, his skin darker violet than Selene's, his presence commanding in its formality. Envoy Kale Duran, he intoned, his voice deep and measured. I am High Chamberlain Orin. Her Majesty requests your immediate presence for the first compatibility assessment. Kale blinked. The first what now? The mandatory sessions that follow a betrothal, Orin explained calmly. Over 30 days, you and Her Majesty will share meals, solve strategic challenges, and discuss personal values to confirm suitability as life partners and rulers. Attendance is not optional. Reyes leaned forward. High Chamberlain, given the unusual nature of this arrangement. There is no unusual nature, Orin interrupted smoothly. The words were spoken. The Empress accepted. Witnesses confirmed. The contract is valid under Dominion law. His gaze shifted back to Kale. You will accompany me. Now. As Kale rose reluctantly, the director muttered, God help us all. The walk through Aurora's grace felt surreal. Just hours ago, Kale had been a minor envoy, navigating cautious diplomacy. Now he was being escorted to the Empress's private quarters as her betrothed. The corridors glowed with soft indigo light, the air faintly perfumed with something floral yet metallic. His pulse quickened with every step. When the chamber doors parted, Selene awaited him. She stood near a crystalline table set for tea, her silver robe draped elegantly, platinum hair catching the soft glow of shifting wall patterns. Her eyes, calm blue now, regarded him not with imperial severity but with something gentler. Kale, she said warmly, I trust you slept well despite recent events. As well as someone can when he's accidentally engaged to a galactic monarch, he muttered, then caught himself. Your Majesty, forgive me. Selene, she interrupted gently. At least when we are in private. Sit. We have much to discuss. He lowered himself into a chair that adjusted itself instantly to his posture. She poured a liquid that shimmered like molten crystal into his cup, then folded her hands. I must be honest with you, Kale began, his voice tense. When I said those words last night, I wasn't proposing. I had no idea they would be interpreted as a binding contract. Selene considered this carefully, her amber gaze unwavering. I understand human customs differ. But I also believe your words were genuine. You were not mocking me. You were sincere. Kale faltered. Well, yes, but... Tell me, Kale, she asked suddenly, leaning forward, what troubles you more, the political implications, or the idea that I may have been forced into something unwanted? He blinked, caught off guard. After a moment's thought, he admitted, honestly. The latter. The idea that my careless words trapped you. Her eyes softened into warm amber again, her smile touched with something almost tender. That, she said quietly, is a revealing answer. It tells me you see me not only as an empress, but as a woman. For a long moment they sat in silence, the gravity of the situation pressing down on him, but also something else, an unexpected current pulling him closer to her, away from fear and toward possibility. You and I, Celine said at last, have 30 days. If, at the end, we find no future together, we part with honor. But if we do, her gaze held his with unflinching intensity. Then we choose a path neither of our peoples could have imagined. Kale swallowed hard, caught between dread and a strange flicker of hope. What had begun as a slip of the tongue was fast becoming the most consequential decision of his life. The first compatibility assessment began with what Kale had naively hoped would be a simple conversation. Instead, he found himself standing in a chamber that resembled both a council room and a living organism. The walls pulsed with slow, luminous patterns, and the table at its center wasn't carved or assembled but grown, crystalline branches twisting upward into elegant seats. High Chamberlain Oren presided with an expression of ceremonial gravity. The purpose of these sessions, he intoned, is to determine whether the bond between Envoy Kale Duran and Empress Celine Vera may endure both personal and imperial trials. Honesty is expected. Collaboration is required. Success is not optional. Kale muttered under his breath, that's reassuring. Celine caught the comment, a glimmer of amusement flickering in her amber eyes. Do not worry, Kale. Most of these trials are less terrifying than they sound. He wasn't so sure. Their first exercise involved a simulated governance challenge. A holographic display unfolded across the chamber, showing 3 colony worlds embroiled in a trade dispute. Each demanded priority access to vital resources. Each threatened revolt if their needs weren't met. Normally, Oren explained, such a matter would be resolved by the Empress herself. Today, you must resolve it together. Kale shot Celine a wary glance. So, do we argue until one of us wins? Celine's lips curved faintly. Partnership, Kale. Not conquest. They began debating policy options. Celine initially favored reinforcing Dominion authority, allocating resources to whichever colony proved the most loyal. Kale, drawing on Earth's history of fragile alliances, argued for rotating distribution, ensuring each world had incentive to cooperate. The discussion grew spirited, voices rising, though never hostile. Kale found himself surprised by how much Celine listened, how she leaned into his arguments instead of brushing them aside. After nearly an hour, they arrived at a hybrid solution, rotating allocations moderated by neutral arbiters, balancing fairness with imperial control. Oren's eyes narrowed with solemn approval. An acceptable compromise. Record noted. Celine turned toward Kale, her platinum hair catching the chamber's light. You argued well. And you revealed something I value. What's that? He asked. That you place long-term stability above short-term gain. A rare quality among rulers. Kale chuckled softly. Among diplomats too, trust me. The second assessment was more intimate. Oren dismissed the holograms and instead guided them into what he called personal resonance exploration. They were seated across from one another, palms resting lightly on a crystalline surface. At his signal, the table warmed, glowing faintly as if responding to their touch. Speak honestly, the Chamberlain instructed. Share a memory that defines who you are. Kale hesitated. Vulnerability wasn't exactly part of his diplomatic toolkit. But Celine spoke first, her voice low and steady. When I was 16, she said, my father died. Suddenly, I was heir. I remember standing in the Hall of Stars, thousands of nobles watching, every one of them calculating how to use me. I swore, in that moment, that I would never allow them to see me weak. Her eyes softened, shifting toward violet sorrow. But in truth, I was terrified. I have ruled ever since with that fear as my shadow. The silence stretched, heavy with her confession. Kale's chest tightened. He had expected grandeur and power, but not this raw honesty. He cleared his throat. When I was 12, my mother worked 3 jobs to keep me in school. I remember sitting at our kitchen table, watching her fall asleep over bills, and promising myself I'd make her sacrifices mean something. That's why I became a diplomat. To prove we weren't powerless. He gave a sheepish smile. Not exactly empire-shaking, but it shaped me. Celine studied him, her expression thoughtful. Not empire-shaking, perhaps. But deeply human. And revealing. The table pulsed softly between them, as though acknowledging the exchange. Oren nodded once. Resonance noted. As the days unfolded, Kale discovered that compatibility meant far more than political debates and shared memories. He and Celine were subjected to endless tests, managing simulated crises, preparing meals together from both human and Dominion ingredients, even collaborating on abstract puzzles designed to measure problem-solving styles. To his own surprise, Kale began to look forward to these sessions. Celine challenged him constantly, questioning his assumptions, sharpening his reasoning, but she also laughed, genuinely laughed, at his sarcastic remarks and offhand jokes. There were moments when the line between ruler and woman blurred, when her amber eyes glowed not with command but with warmth. One evening, after a particularly exhausting exercise that required them to negotiate peace between feuding noble houses in a simulation, Kale collapsed into his chair and groaned. So this is marriage, huh? Endless arguments with no winners. Celine tilted her head, platinum hair falling across her shoulder. On the contrary, Kale. We won. Together. That is the lesson. Feels more like we survived, he muttered. Her lips curved. Survival, too, is victory. Something in her tone made his chest tighten again. Beneath the layers of diplomacy and protocol, he sensed a woman who longed not for obedient courtiers but for an equal. Someone unafraid to challenge her. Someone who saw her not as an empress of unshakable power, but as Celine, the person. As the 3rd week began, Kale realized he was no longer counting the days until freedom. Instead, he found himself wondering what it might mean if the 30 days ended not in dissolution, but in a choice to stay. The compatibility sessions had started as trials, tests Kale felt he had to survive. Yet somewhere along the way, they transformed into something else. Conversations he looked forward to, puzzles he wanted to solve not just because of the outcome but because of who he was solving them with. Celine's presence had shifted, too. Where once she had been imposing, all crystalline grace and imperial distance, now she revealed glimpses of a woman beneath the crown. She admitted, quietly, that most suitors only saw her throne. That she had endured years of strategic courtships and calculated proposals, none of them about her. Her skin, soft lilac in the chamber's light, seemed almost fragile when she spoke of loneliness, her platinum hair falling forward to half-shield her expression. You must understand, she said one evening after their assessment, her amber eyes subdued to a deep blue, that my entire adult life has been spent as an object of strategy. Not once has someone looked at me and thought of companionship, only advantage. Kale hesitated, then leaned forward across the crystalline table. Then maybe that's why my idiotic comment caught you off guard. I wasn't thinking strategy. I wasn't thinking at all. For a heartbeat, Celine was silent. Then she laughed, a genuine, unrestrained sound that sparkled in the chamber like sunlight through glass. It may have been the worst proposal in history, Kale Duran. But it was also the most honest I've ever received. That honesty became their rhythm. They sparred over policy by day, laughed over shared meals by night. He taught her to play a human card game with crude paper decks printed aboard the ship, and she countered by introducing him to the Dominion's ritual dance forms, movements that looked daunting until she guided his hands, her touch firm yet oddly reassuring. But the closer they drew, the louder the outside world intruded. Whispers began circulating in the Dominion's court, that the Empress had bound herself to a human untested by war or tradition. Noble families bristled at the idea of an off-worlder sharing imperial authority. And from Earth, the pressure mounted as well. Director Reyes and the other officials cornered Kale after a session, their expressions grim. "Do you understand the danger?" Reyes hissed, pacing their quarters. "If you go through with this marriage, you become more than a diplomat. You'll be seen as a traitor by some, a pawn by others. Earth cannot afford to be accused of trying to infiltrate the Dominion through marriage." Kale swallowed. "And if I don't? If I just dissolve the contract?" Elara Miles rubbed her eyes. "Then you risk insulting the most powerful woman in this quadrant, not to mention destabilizing relations after months of progress. Either choice is dangerous, Kale. There's no safe way out." That night, as he returned to Celine's chambers for their evening discussion, he found her waiting near the viewport, starlight pouring across her figure. She didn't turn when he entered, but her voice carried clearly. "They do not want you to continue, do they?" Kale froze. "You heard?" Her platinum hair shimmered as she shook her head. "I did not need to hear. I know the weight of politics when it sits on someone's shoulders. Tell me, Kale, do you wish to continue?" He approached slowly, the view of the stars a vast reminder of how small they both were compared to what hung in the balance. "I don't know," he admitted. "Part of me thinks I'd be insane to agree to this. To tie myself not just to you, but to an entire empire. And another part of me." "Another part," she prompted gently, finally turning toward him. Her eyes were amber again, warm and searching. "Another part doesn't want to walk away. Not because of politics. Because of you." Silence lingered between them, heavier than any decree. Then Celine stepped closer, close enough that Kale could see faint iridescence in her lilac skin, the way her hair caught the starlight like threads of spun silver. "Do you know what I told my council when they pressed me to consider other suitors?" she asked softly. "What?" "That for the first time in my reign, I was curious about what it would mean to share power rather than guard it alone. And for the first time, I was hopeful that someone might see Celine the woman, not just Celine the Empress." Kale felt something twist inside him, both frightening and exhilarating. He hadn't come here looking for this. He hadn't planned it, strategized it, or even wanted it. But the thought of stepping back now felt like tearing something fragile before it had the chance to grow. Before he could speak, the chamber doors slid open and High Chamberlain Orin entered, his robes shimmering with authority. His face was more severe than usual. "Your Majesty. Envoy. The Council's demand audience." Celine's expression hardened, her regal mask sliding back into place. "They challenge us already. They question the validity of your union, Your Majesty," Orin replied gravely. "And they will not be satisfied without answers." Kale's heart sank. Their private bubble, fragile and precious, was about to be shattered under the scrutiny of governments and traditions. Whatever they were building together would soon be tested in the harshest arena of all, the councils of two civilizations. The council chamber was no place for hesitation. Kale realized this the moment he and Celine stood before the holographic array that connected Earth's leaders and the Dominion's nobles in a single sprawling forum. A dozen translucent figures flickered to life around them, some human, others Varen, each radiating suspicion in their own distinct way. Director Reyes appeared at the Earth end of the table, his voice carefully neutral but his eyes sharp. "Envoy Duran, Empress Celine. We require assurance. This arrangement cannot compromise human interests." Beside him, Secretary Lin Chen leaned forward, her tone clipped. "A personal relationship with a foreign sovereign presents unavoidable conflicts of interest. If disputes arise between Earth and the Dominion, whose side will you take, Mr. Duran?" Kale's pulse hammered. He opened his mouth, but Celine raised a hand. Her gaze swept the human delegation, amber eyes glowing with quiet authority. "Secretary Chen," she said smoothly, "your question insults both myself and your envoy. Do you presume that marriage renders one incapable of independent judgment? That a woman's mind dissolves the moment she accepts a husband?" "That's not what we meant," Chen began, but Celine's voice cut across like crystal. "Then understand this. My choice of consort does not diminish my sovereignty, nor does it erase Envoy Duran's duty to his people. What it does is strengthen the foundation upon which our two civilizations may stand together. Do you truly fear unity so much that you would sabotage it?" Her words reverberated in the chamber, commanding silence. But the Dominion's nobles were not so easily cowed. One of them, Noble Threxer, stepped forward in shimmering regalia, his lilac skin darker than Celine's, his tone edged with disdain. "Your Majesty, the Dominion has endured millennia by preserving its traditions. And yet you bring a human into our heart, offering him co-rule. He cannot understand our ways, nor bear the weight of our inheritance." Kale bristled, but Celine tilted her head toward him ever so slightly, a signal. "Speak." Kale swallowed hard, then met Threxer's gaze. "With respect, Noble Threxer, tradition endures not by calcifying but by adapting. My perspective as human doesn't erase Varen culture, it complements it. Where your empire has centuries of centralized authority, I bring lessons from a history of fragile alliances, multicultural negotiations, and crises managed by cooperation rather than domination. That doesn't weaken the Dominion. It makes it stronger." A ripple went through the assembled nobles. Some skeptical, others contemplative. Threxer's eyes narrowed. "You speak as though you mean to change us." "I speak," Kale countered, "as someone who believes survival comes from combining strengths. Earth has much to learn from the Dominion. But the Dominion can learn from us too. That's not dilution. That's resilience." For the first time, Threxer did not immediately dismiss him. His gaze flickered toward Celine, who stood tall, her platinum hair gleaming in the chamber's light. "You see," she said softly, though her voice carried across the assembly. "He does not grovel for my favor. He challenges. He strengthens. And in 1 week he has offered more genuine insight into governance than many of you have in years." The silence was heavy, but no longer hostile. On the Earth side, Secretary Chen adjusted her glasses. "Even if what you say is true, there remains the question of succession. If this union produces heirs." Celine's eyes flared silver, her voice cool. "That question is premature. Our focus is on compatibility, not reproduction. Let us finish what has begun before demanding what may never come." Reyes raised a hand, his tone resigned. "Then let me ask directly, Envoy Duran. Do you, personally, wish to continue this engagement?" Kale looked around the chamber. At the stern faces of Earth officials, at the calculating stares of Dominion nobles. And finally, at Celine, who met his gaze not with command but with quiet vulnerability. In that moment, he understood, whatever decision he made, it would reshape not only his life but the destiny of two peoples. "I do," Kale said firmly. "Not because of politics. Not because of obligation. But because, for the first time, I've found a partner who sees beyond duty. Someone I believe I can build with. And if that makes me a risk, then perhaps the risk is exactly what our civilizations need." Celine's amber eyes glowed with something deeper than satisfaction. Pride. Affection. A silent thank you. The session stretched another hour, arguments circling but never returning to outright hostility. By its end, what had begun as fierce opposition softened into grudging acknowledgement. The councils might not yet approve, but neither did they forbid. The union could continue, for now. When the chamber finally emptied, Kale sagged into a chair, every muscle aching with tension. "Well," he muttered, "that could have gone worse." Celine stepped closer, her platinum hair brushing his shoulder as she leaned down, her voice low and intimate. You spoke not as diplomat, but as partner. And you proved them wrong. Kale looked up at her, suddenly aware of how close they were, how the glow of her lilac skin seemed to warm the air itself. I wasn't trying to prove anything, he admitted. I was just telling the truth. Her lips curved, almost tender. Then perhaps truth is all we need. And in that moment, Kale realized the most dangerous part of this engagement wasn't politics, wasn't tradition, wasn't even the councils. It was the fact that, despite everything, he was beginning to want it to be real. The 30 days came and went with a strange rhythm, each one blurring into the next. Kale and Celine's daily trials tested everything from governance to philosophy, from managing crises to cooking together in kitchens that shimmered with crystalline tools. Somewhere in between, the line between performance and reality blurred. They still debated fiercely, but their arguments ended with laughter more often than frustration. They still challenged each other, but instead of distance, the challenges drew them closer. By the final week, Kale no longer woke with dread about what awaited him. He woke with anticipation, sometimes even with a quiet excitement at what new piece of Celine he would discover that day. The night before the decision, Kale found himself on the observation deck where it had all begun. Starlight stretched endlessly outside the viewport, a reminder of how small and vast everything was at once. He was still staring into the void when Celine arrived, her platinum hair cascading like liquid silver over her shoulders, her lilac skin glowing faintly in the soft light. "You're quiet," she said gently, settling beside him. Kale chuckled softly. "Just trying to wrap my head around the fact that I'm about to either walk away from the most extraordinary experience of my life, or step into something so big it terrifies me." Celine tilted her head, eyes shifting into a calm amber. "What terrifies you more? The power? The responsibility?" "No," Kale admitted. "The possibility that I won't be good enough for you." For a moment, Celine said nothing. Then she reached out, her hand cool and steady against his cheek. "In 30 days, you've challenged me more than any advisor in years. You've made me laugh when I thought I had forgotten how. You've reminded me I am a woman, not only a ruler. That is enough." The next morning, the formal ceremony unfolded in the Aurora's Grace Assembly Hall. Nobles of the Dominion shimmered in their radiant attire, human diplomats stood stiffly in pressed uniforms. The chamber glowed with thousands of crystalline lights, each one refracting starlight across the vaulted ceiling. High Chamberlain Oren presided, his voice carrying solemn authority. "Envoy Kale Duran," he said. "You have completed the 30-day verification period. Do you choose to honor your spoken words and accept Empress Celine Vera as your consort, assuming all responsibilities of co-rulership?" Kale turned, scanning the faces around him. He saw skepticism, concern, fear. But when his gaze found Celine, standing tall, regal yet vulnerable in the way her amber eyes fixed on his, everything else fell away. 30 days ago, Kale began, his voice steady, "I said something foolish. I told the Empress she would make a cute wife. It wasn't meant as a proposal. And yet, in the week since, I've learned that she is more than cute. She is wise, strong, vulnerable, and extraordinary. I choose her. Not because I have to, but because I want to." A ripple of laughter spread across the hall at the reference to his infamous slip, but it was warm, not mocking. Celine's lips curved, her eyes glowing with an amber that seemed to shimmer brighter than any jewel. Oren turned toward her. "Empress Celine Vera. Do you accept this union and grant Envoy Duran authority as co-ruler, bound by Dominion law?" Celine stepped forward, her silver gown whispering across the crystalline floor. 30 days ago, Kale gave me something I had never received, a genuine expression of affection, uncalculated, unstrategic. In the time since, he has given me laughter, companionship, and the courage to imagine sharing power. I accept not because tradition demands it, but because I choose him." The chamber erupted. The Varens hummed in resonant chords of joy, their voices weaving into harmonic waves that filled the hall. The human delegation clapped uncertainly, then with growing enthusiasm. High Chamberlain Orin raised his hands, his voice ringing. By the authority of the Dominion and witnessed by Earth, I declare this union sealed. The celebration spilled across the ship, music and light blending in ways no culture had ever attempted before. Cale found himself swept into endless congratulations, but what he remembered most was when Celine found him later on the observation deck, the same place where a foolish remark had rewritten both their lives. "Any regrets?" she asked softly, leaning beside him. Cale smiled. "Just one. That I didn't think of a better proposal line." She laughed, her platinum hair catching the starlight. "On the contrary. It was terrible. And perfect." He turned toward her, taking in the lilac glow of her skin, the strength and vulnerability in her gaze. "Then let me say it properly. Empress Celine Vera, I choose you. Today, tomorrow, every day after." Her answer was a kiss, gentle and sure. And as the stars drifted past the viewport, Cale realized the truth: sometimes history was changed not by grand strategy, but by a careless word spoken honestly. He had not just found an empress. He had found a partner. And together, they would face whatever the galaxy chose to send their way. So that's the story, how a careless comment turned into the most unexpected union in galactic history. What began as a diplomat's blunder became a partnership that bridged two civilizations. Cale and Celine's journey reminds us that sometimes the moments we least plan for, the ones that slip past our polished masks, hold the power to reshape our lives forever. Over 30 days, two people from opposite worlds discovered the strength of honesty, vulnerability, and shared laughter. They learned that real compatibility isn't found in perfect circumstances, but in choosing each other again and again despite the chaos around them. And in the end, Cale didn't just gain a crown or a title, he gained someone who saw him, challenged him, and stood with him. Stories like these aren't just about space empires or alien customs. They're about us, about the courage to admit what we feel, the risks of vulnerability, and the unexpected joy of finding connection where we least expect it. If you enjoyed this story, I'd love for you to be part of this channel's journey too. Hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next adventure. Drop a like if Cale's awkward, cute wife proposal made you smile, and share this video with a friend who loves sci-fi twists on romance. Together, we'll keep exploring strange new stories, and maybe even discover a little bit of ourselves along the way. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and remember, sometimes the smallest words spark the biggest futures.